Yeah. That's a great way to start an interview, if ever I've heard it. So tell us, Chris, obviously, when did the light railway arrive here?
Here in Skegness, it was rebuilt from about 1995 onwards. It took us until the year 2009 to reopen the line. There were only 2 or 3 volunteers who were rebuilding the railway.
Right.
And it was done a wee bit like the pyramids in Egypt. That once a month we would arrive as volunteers and bring loads of ballast and rails and sleepers on the train up to where the rebuilding was taking place. And there was one chap called Asling Evison, who's still alive, still involved with the railway, lives in Skegness, who would then, over the next month, single-handedly rebuild the railway. He'd put down the membrane to keep out the damp, the ballast, the sleepers, the sprags, the fish plates, and the rails.
Right, okay.
It was an extraordinary achievement.
Yeah.
And it took us until 2009 to get to the stage where we felt we could reopen the railway, which we have done, and it's been a huge success, as you can see today, with hundreds of people on the trains and enjoying all the other attractions at the Classic Wheels show.
Yeah. Now tell us about the, now you got the red carriage at the back. Tell us a bit about that.
That carriage, the big red carriage, comes from the Ashover Light Railway in Derbyshire.
Yeah.
And was built in the 1920s, about 1924. There were 4 of them, and the Ashover Light Railway was built to carry aggregates for the Claycross Iron Company. But the government of the day said, well, we'd like you to put on a passenger service.
Right.
So 4 absolutely enormous carriages for 2-foot gauge were built. The running gear was all ex-First World War trench railways.
Yeah.
But the vehicles were new. That ran till the 1930s, the passenger service. Once buses came along, it was redundant, and the vehicles finished up as sports pavilions. And they were acquired by the Lincolnshire Coast Light Railway in 1962, and we restored them to running order. A third one is operating on the Golden Valley Railway in Derbyshire. We've got one on the train today. We've got another one in our depot, which is being restored over the winter. A lot of years of neglect having to be removed, rot and so on.
Sure.
But we're putting it back into the condition in which it ran at Humberston in the 60s, 70s and early 80s.
Brilliant. Now the carriage we're standing in, it's got a bit of history to it as well, hasn't it?
Well, it has, yes. I mean, I'm not sure I like standing in it because the various shrapnel holes around suggested it got far too close to the German artillery in the First World War. And looking at as we're chugging along behind this lovely old engine built in 1903, you wonder if our friends with the spiky helmets aren't getting us in their sights again.
Yeah.
So it was built in 1916 in Lincoln. It's the only surviving one built by Clayton and Shuttleworth of Lincoln. It got a direct hit from the Germans in World War I, but it still kept running. It was used on the Nocton Estates railways, carrying potatoes and sugar beet, and it was a bit of a celebrity there because of its damage.
Yeah.
It then became the first passenger carriage on the Lincolnshire Coast Light Railway on the 27th of August 1960,
Brilliant.
when it opened as the world's first heritage railway to be built by enthusiasts.
Fantastic.
And
Fantastic.
it was restored with the aid of a grant from the Lottery Fund after a televised competition on ITV, and it won the competition and £43,000 towards its restoration.
Oh, fantastic.
And
right. Tell me about Jurassic, the lovely engine that we've got pulling us today.
Jurassic, absolutely beautiful steam engine, built in 1903. My wife says it's my mistress, but then I've always had an interesting eye for curves in the right place. And Jurassic's got plenty of them. She was built to run in a cement quarry at a village called Southam in Warwickshire.
Yeah.
And we bought her in 1961 for £50, including delivery to Humberston.
Wow.
And the following day the diesel engine broke down, so we put in the coal and the water and the oil and lit the blue touch paper, and she worked perfectly.
Amazing.
We ran until 1985 at Humberston. A year later she was exhibited at the Leighton Buzzard Light Railway in Buckinghamshire, and then was out of use until about 3 years ago, when again we got a lottery grant
Yeah.
to renovate her, and we had of course to put the rest of the money in ourselves, and in 2017 she was returned to service, and this year she's operated on every Saturday that we've been running, and she's also operated a Wednesday service. We've started running on Wednesdays now, and this year we experimented with steam, incredibly popular as you can imagine, and today she's proving very popular on what I suspect will be the busiest day in the railway's history.
Yeah. Now, is Jurassic the only engine that you have here?
Jurassic's the only steam engine we have here, but we have 6 historic diesels of a type called simplexes, which again were developed for use in the First World War. Our oldest one goes back to 1920, called Nocton, and it was built for the Nocton Estates Light Railway.
Right.
And there is even a chap who lives less than a mile from where the train is now, who remembers going on that as a boy in World War II, lifting potatoes. We've 6 of these engines.
Now, I understand that the simplexes are very similar to a sort of a tank, aren't they?
Well, indeed. There was indeed an armoured version of them, known as tin turtles, which were armour plated, so that if they got hit by shells or whatever, then there was some protection for the driver and the equipment. And a couple of those are preserved in locations around the country. Ours were never the armoured simplexes. They were built after the First World War, and in some cases in the Second World War, because the military still used narrow gauge railways. They're incredibly useful for moving equipment and stores and supplies and ammunition around warehouses and fields of operation for the military. They carry huge loads on very light track on small distances, up hills, round corners, places where big railways can't really get to.
And of course they were designed obviously to get those munitions and that to
That's
the front,
exactly what they were designed for, yeah. The Germans and the French had already developed narrow gauge railways in the First World War, and the British didn't use them, and that's perhaps a contributory factor to disasters like Passchendaele, because the British Army could not move men and munitions up to the front, and it couldn't bring the wounded back either. And when the British decided that they needed light railways, then they did it on a grand and hugely successful scale. They had something like 2,000 miles of track, hundreds of locomotives, steam, petrol electric, diesel electric, and they also used mules and hand power to literally push the wagons right into the trenches. And we've actually got some of those. We have 3 of the ration wagons in our Historic Vehicles Trust, and we've got 3 of the larger bogie wagons, one of which we're travelling in now. We've also got the only surviving ambulance van that was built to bring the wounded back from the frontline fighting.
Brilliant.
So what we've saved is a unique collection, and it was based here in Lincolnshire, very much part of Lincolnshire's life. Not only in Nocton, but nearly everywhere in Lincolnshire there were villages where farm railways of anything up to 7 or even 13 miles would run to bring produce in from the fields, to take things like manure and seeds and supplies and implements into the fields where tractors and trucks could not go.
Of course,
An important part of our history here in Lincolnshire.
Now, for people to come and obviously view everything you've got, is it open? How often is this place open?
It's open on about 14 or 15 days during the summer. So we normally operate on Saturdays, mid-July to the end of August, bank holiday Sunday, Wednesdays in August, and on special occasions like the one here today for the Classic Wheel Show. So we don't operate really all that often, but as the railway becomes more popular, as more volunteers join us, then that becomes possible to expand the service.
Brilliant. And you are looking for more and more people to get
We
involved.
are indeed, yes.
Become part of it.
We've got a website, www.lclr.co.uk. That stands for Lincolnshire Coast Light Railway. And that tells you how to get in touch and to volunteer. And we give full training. So if your desire in life, your secret desire, has always been to be a train driver, well, we'll make sure that comes true. You've got to be 16 or over, and you've got to be reasonably fit. You've got to have a driving licence and have good eyesight and all the rest of it. But even so, if you don't meet those criteria, if you don't want to do that, there's lots of work to do in maintaining the track, and we tend on Wednesdays throughout the year to have a working party on the track and maintenance to the locomotives and carriages. So if you like painting bits of old machinery, we can give you plenty to paint. If you like tinkering with old diesel engines, we've got lots to tinker with. And if you really want to get your hand inside Jurassic's unmentionables, you can do so here.
So what's the long-term plan now for the Lincolnshire Coast Light Railway?
Long-term plan is to get more of our carriages back. We've got 3 or 4 very historic carriages that we need to renovate and get in. Whether the railway would ever be extended, I don't know. It's an expensive business.
Yes.
And it's also a question of there being sufficient, adequate land available. And many railways have found that if you double the length of the railway, you halve your income. Because it takes longer for the train to go from one end to the other. Or you have to have 2 trains, and that adds enormously to the costs and to the number of volunteers. And a railway, if you look around, there's an awful lot of very young children enjoying the train ride. Very often their first train ride. Now they're happy for 20 minutes. But if you said that's an hour, then they're going to get fidgety. So maybe we're about the optimum length.
And what's the sort of running costs a year it has to actually keep all this going?
It costs thousands of pounds a year, and the pound fare we charge is only a token. The rest of the costs, then we have our own charitable trust, which helps with the renovation of the vehicles it owns. Everything else we have to find ourselves and from our supporters, and put our hands in our pockets and buy it or do it or whatever. And there are people who've gone out and bought thousands of pounds worth of rails, bought a new locomotive and things like that. Not saying it's a hobby for the wealthy. If you're of more modest means, like most of us, then you can chip in with odd tins of paint or whatever else is needed.
So really anybody, over the age 16 can get involved, come along and support you, can do their little bit, get their hands dirty, and really help to make it, what it already is.
Yes, and what I would say to people is, even if you don't particularly know what you would like to do in an organisation like this, come along, something will grab you that you probably haven't thought of. Some obscure part of its operation will suddenly obsess you and take over your life. And that's what you want to do and get involved with, and we're very happy with that. Most of our volunteers are not classical railway enthusiasts, not the guys you'd see at the end of a platform with a notebook getting excited over some number they haven't taken before. They're just people who like to be involved in something positive, sociable, it's good exercise, plenty of fresh air, and where you can see something truly enjoyable and worthwhile at the end of your involvement.
Chris, it's been fascinating talking to you. I could talk to you all day. I really could. It's been absolutely brilliant. What you've got here is an amazing thing for Skegness, not the rest of the country, but
indeed,
having here in Skegness is a massive boost.
It's extraordinary. We're getting people. We had a visitor from Osaka in Japan the other day, and I said, what else have you come to see? No, he said, I've come to see your railway. And we had a chat from Vienna about 2 weeks before that. He said he'd come here just to see us, but he did seem to have gone via the Isle of Man and a couple of railways between Douglas Ferry Terminal and Skegness, so maybe he was just indulging me a wee bit, but he clearly hugely enjoyed his visit, and it's marvellous to think that we're now bringing people to Lincolnshire who perhaps otherwise would not have come, and that is contributing to the economy, because people buy accommodation and they buy meals in cafes and restaurants and all sorts of souvenirs and other things. So it all helps the overall economy of this part of Lincolnshire.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, we've actually worked this out beautifully. We have come to the end of the line.
We have.
So I thank you ever so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to meet you.
And thank you, County Linx Radio.
Work.
Thanks for all the support that County Linx Radio gives us as well.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.